We're now up to Chapter 9 in Wuthering Heights. You may have figured out that this is a pivotal chapter considering I've only assigned one chapter for reading. When we begin this chapter, we're picking up from the previous chapter when Henley is on his way to return home. What happens when Henley returns home? Well, we have a great deal of violence, or at least the threat of violence. To a gothic level. The malevolent male patriarch, what terror might he bring? How is he oscillating back and forth between emotions? Pay attention to his behavior with his son. Pay attention to his behavior with Nellie Dean. What does Nellie actually say to Henley? Is it at all interesting how she behaves with the threat of a knife in front of her? What does she do? What ultimately happens from this interaction? Well, we know poor Harrington is going over the railings. When he lands, he thankfully lands into Heathcliff's arms. So, had it been dark, look at this phrasing. Look what Nellie says. Nellie believes that she knows what Heathcliff was thinking as he realizes what he's caught. Is this Heathcliff's real desire or Nellie's prejudice? We need to ask ourselves as she characterizes Heathcliff and Catherine and all the other characters in this book. Are her own prejudices coming through? How is she characterizing? We know with Cathy, she owns up that she never really liked her. With Heathcliff, it seems a little bit more confused. On one hand, she subscribes and ascribes to him very violent tendencies, but yet seems to prefer him over some others. Why is that? Think about what this might suggest. After this, Cathy comes in to share some information with Nellie. What information is it? Why is it so significant? Why is Cathy unhappy and yet really not sure why she's unhappy? She makes this great proclamation that she knows here and here, striking her forehead and her chest, that what she has decided is wrong even though it's right. What's going on? What conflict is building in Cathy and why? We certainly have Nellie's response to it, and what Nellie thinks about it is fairly clear from how she questions Cathy, even reproves Cathy, or in a certain sense castigates her. So why is she upset with Cathy and Cathy's decision? What is the obstacle to Cathy's decision? And why is Cathy so upset about her decision? Again, it's going to cycle back and forth. We have her describing what she's done, describing the reasons for what she's done, and then we have something else. We have a dream. Cathy wants to share a dream with Nellie. Nellie is very reluctant to hear the dream. Why? Why is she so reluctant? What would that suggest? The dream has some very interesting diction. Look at what Nellie's response to the dream, what words she uses, the unusual gloom, the dread prophecy, the fearful catastrophe. Diction conveys the tone and meaning, and it's a very Gothic motif that Nellie's words describing listening to a dream suggest that there's something prophetic, something foreboding about listening to this dream that she doesn't want to be involved in. Why? In this dream, we have yet again another inversion of heaven and hell. What does Cathy say about heaven? Why does heaven seem to not be her home? What might heaven represent? Because she is very happy to be thrown out of it and back to the heath where Wuthering Heights is. Why does she wake sobbing for joy, since Wuthering Heights has actually become such a hellish place, especially with Henley? Why is Wuthering Heights more desirable than heaven? What is heaven? She goes on to talk about the fact that it would degrade her to marry Heathcliff. What happens at that moment is that Heathcliff leaves, and he never really hears the end, which is that she loves him even though she can never marry him. What does it suggest about the power of class? What does it suggest about who a woman marries, putting her into one class or another? Remember, Frances marries Henley. She may have moved up. We don't really know her background. But we do know that if Cathy were to marry Heathcliff, would Heathcliff rise to her class, or would she descend to his? And think about how low he's been brought down by Henley. Why is this not a possibility for Catherine? Catherine also justifies what she's doing as a way to raise Heathcliff up. Do you find this a believable argument? Does Nellie find it a believable argument? Does Cathy really have it as a believable argument? Or is this simply self-deception? There is a great deal of imagery in this dream passage and her descriptions about her feelings. Focus specifically on when Cathy is talking about Edgar and how she feels about him, and Heathcliff and how she feels about him. What images does she use to describe them? Which image goes with which person, and why? What does it suggest, and how does it contrast them? And what might this set up as a division within this novel between two different ways of looking at the world, as we see two different houses, as we see heaven and hell, civilization and freedom and wildness? What is going on with all of these contrasts? What is Bronte trying to suggest? She also brings up an interesting allusion that you would probably not get right off the top of your head. And she basically proclaims to Nellie, even with her decision, that nothing would separate her and Heathcliff. If they tried to, they would suffer the fate of Milo. In this, Cathy is referring to a famous wrestler who, when he attempted to tear apart a tree with his bare hands, it shut upon him, trapping him inside the cleft of the trunk. And trapped there, he was set upon by wolves who rip him apart. Again, we get this wolf-dog motif going on. We get an image of nature and the power of nature. And I want you to be on the lookout for any tree or trees that show up later in this chapter and how it might echo back to this illusion. We have a storm. What does the storm correspond with? We know that Heathcliff has heard Cathy say that it would degrade her to marry him. He hasn't heard anything else that she said. What ultimately happens? Cathy is looking and waiting for Heathcliff, and a storm is building. What happens when the storm finally gets there? What effect does it have on both the physical landscape and on Cathy? Who leaves at the end of this chapter? Who leaves physically by leaving Wuthering Heights? Who sickens and who gets others sick? And ultimately, is there anyone who dies? So look at the ending of this chapter. You might miss the people who die. It glosses over fairly quickly. But there are people leaving Wuthering Heights. Who are they? Why is it significant? And what impact does it have on the Wuthering Heights we've seen in 1801 when our novel begins?